The South African Communist Party is picketing in Hanover Square, Cape Town, against the electricity crisis, the high cost of living and unemployment. SABC News reporter Mariska Botha is there and joins us live. A very good afternoon to you, Mariska. What are you seeing there?
Well, I can tell you one thing for certain today. It's a scorcher, 35 degrees here in the city. But nonetheless, people have gathered here in Hanover Square where they are picketing, as it's not the usual kind of state of affairs where people would march on Parliament, as Parliament is not being used. Just down the road to my left and your right is where tonight's SONA will be held. And this is where the SACP has gathered. They are also joined here by COSATU and other organizations that are here in support and also giving their own messages. But to get to the main part of the day, we're speaking to Solly Mapaila, the SACP General Secretary. Mr. Mapaila, thank you so very much for speaking to us. What is your overarching message in the run-up to SONA tonight?
The main task is to ask government to respond to the working class conditions, the poverty in our communities, crime in our communities, load shedding, which has become a crisis in itself, the high cost of living, which the people cannot afford anymore, that has made living itself a crisis amongst the poor. And we are asking government that the president must commit his government to implement drastic measures that can take out people from poverty and not bring rhetoric that is intangible and cannot be implementable. And that is why today here we have brought together a variety of organizations in a front form. As you can see, for instance, there's someone on the stage now from a different organizations, including the Tutula movement, the community workers program people, which are some of the most exploited workers in our country, working through a government system. We want those people to be fully employed permanently, and we will be running this movement throughout the country to ensure that community workers are employed permanently, because there's a need for them to be permanently employed. We also have members of the Liberation War veterans, particularly from MK and other organizations that are participating with us to call for the rights of those people and also to utilize them effectively in our communities, because these are people with skills. They may not be technical skills that are required by industry, but these are skills that will be required by our society given the crisis that we face. That's part of the reason why we are picketing here today.
And you said you don't want to hear rhetoric tonight. So what words would you like to hear from President Cyril Ramaphosa?
We want implementables with a concrete timeline of interventions to end load shedding. We are losing so much money in the country as an economy, and when you look at the proportionate loss of money and the interventions, you realize that the country has accepted to lose so much money and not make interventions that can save that money as well and save the economy. So we want those kind of tangible things, how the government is going to help the poor. For instance, the sustainability of a grant for the unemployed people, given the fact that unemployment is rising and big capital is not coming to the party. On the contrary, is declaring more profits. The banks, for instance, as a financial sector, throughout this year, majority of the leading banks have declared huge resources in the 2022 financial year, indicating that in the midst of crisis, the corporates continue to reap profits. And therefore, the public interventions, public economy becomes more critical and more urgent for the government of the day to appreciate that. And it is in that regard that we have also participated in other activities in the run-up to this process to call for proper governance and the fight against corruption in all respects, in the corporates as well as in our communities. So overall is to make sure that basic things, there's no convoluted speeches, but is to say this is how we're going to resolve the crisis of ESCOM. And we cannot accept the timelines that were set of more than a year. That's too much for the people to can accept. So that we know that there could be quicker interventions, and those interventions must be released.
Maybe just as a tripartite member, do you feel pressure as the SACP to raise your voice to the governing party to government because you're in that stronghold, you're in that fold. How is that tripartite alliance doing given the situation in the country?
The alliance has made its comments as much as it could, and these comments have been ignored by government. That is why we have gone to mass mobilization, because finally it's the people that can rescue this democracy. It's the people that can defend the constitutional rights enshrined in the Constitution that they fought for. And therefore, if the government can listen to the voices that are closest to them, like from the alliance components, for instance, we're supposed to have an economic and energy summit, which the president agreed to when he addressed our National Congress last year, July. And we also agreed that we will have that before the ANC National Conference. Ultimately, it was not held. So critical voices of the allies of the ruling party, the ANC, have been ignored. What more of society? That's why we have reconnected with the mass base to raise issues ourselves, to fight for our own struggles, and in our communities to exude areas where we can implement self-reliance methods. And we began to do that. Over the weekend, for instance, we're doing work in Limpopo province, reconnecting about 18 villages into a sustainable livelihood intervention by the Communist Party and the local organization, including the religious leaders, to make sure that we drive this program of transformation deeply by ourselves and no longer rely exclusively on government. But we still believe that government has a critical role to play because it's the government of the people, it's a democratically elected government, it must respond to the needs of the people. But in the event that government is not coming up, we have to take up measures on our own. In my own community, we have created a platform, for instance, to end crime. And we have ended crime by 80% overnight. I've invited ministers, the Premier in Gauteng, for instance, where I stay, to come and see and visit my local neighborhood, where we are making our own small interventions, and they can learn, perhaps expand some of this thing to other areas and even give support where appropriate. And this is happening across the country.
Thank you very, very much. Mr. Solima Paisa, the Secretary General of the SACP. While it's indeed serious business that the President of the country faced tonight, you heard there that voices are being ignored within the Tripartite Alliance. SACP telling us meetings that were scheduled to happen didn't take place. So it's indeed a very poignant day today. And people here, as I'm stepping out of shot to show you, are gathered to voice just exactly what those grievances are. Front and center is, of course, the energy crisis that is decimating the country's economy.